Welcome to Close Calls on the 42 Dolly, brought to you in association with Air Sport. You know the drill at this stage. Every week, every Friday around this time, we get the hottest pundits in the game on the line to look ahead to the biggest sporting event of the weekend. And this weekend it is all about the Champions Cup, round 2 of the pool stages. My name is Gavin Casey. I'm delighted to be joined by Ryan Bailey of the 42 next to me here. Ryan, how's tricks?
Gav, all good, yeah. Delighted to be here. Looking forward to another big weekend of Champions Cup rugby.
Big time. Myself and Ryan are thrilled also to be joined on Skype by the former Ireland head coach Eddie O'Sullivan. Eddie, how are you?
Good, thanks.
We will be chatting obviously about Champions Cup in due course. I think there are two things you and I were keen to touch on. Firstly, I think the biggest rugby story of the week, certainly in these parts, is the controversy surrounding the Irish women's setup and the coaching situation there. Ryan, the IRFU have put out a statement today clarifying the job vacancy that they posted a couple of days ago. What do you make of it all? It's a little bit muddled, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose, Gav, just to start, like a hugely disappointing, discouraging, disheartening week. I mean, and that's kind of just from the outside looking in, us kind of outside the bubble, so to speak. I can only imagine what the players who 100% dedication, commitment to the cause, make huge sacrifices, both family life, work life, are feeling. We got a glimpse of that on social media, a couple of them voicing their anger, which I think anger is probably the right word, because that kind of came through in it. On the back of the World Cup, which was obviously disastrous, while though it was disastrous, you'd hope that hitting rock bottom was going to be the turning of the tide. You'd hope that those disappointing results and the disappointing tournament on the fields was going to spark and be the catalyst for change. Unfortunately, this week it doesn't appear to be so, and as you say, the RFU clarifying their position today, and unfortunately it's a statement that, or an explanation that shouldn't really have been necessary, because they shouldn't have got themselves in this position in the first place. Ultimately the statement is just clarifying and confirming what everyone already knew, is that they're looking to appoint an interim head coach for the Six Nations next year, which again is short-sighted, a short-term solution. And I suppose the word disrespectful has been bandied about a lot this week, and I think that's probably appropriate.
Eddie, what do you make of it? It seems like a bit of a piss take, truth be told.
It was a bad week for the RFU and for women's rugby, because for all intents and purposes it looked like they were going to downgrade the women's 15s programme. Suspicion around that is there's a limited pot of money for women's rugby, and they were going to prioritise the sevens programme because of the Olympic dimension to it, which is a pity really, because if that was the direction it was going, it was very disappointing. It was a bad World Cup, but there's no point in throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And they were using the women as part of their pitch for the Ireland to get the World Cup in 2023. Like, they were part of the rugby community. It didn't really look like that this week. But I think that today's announcement actually is very positive for women's rugby, because I would see the silver lining in the cloud here. I think that there was a bit of news that I think nobody knew, is that Tom Tierney wasn't really a full-time 15s women's coach. He was also working on the sevens. I don't think anyone knew that, or anyone was aware of that. They are now. And I think they're under pressure now in this review to come back with a very strong strategic plan for the women's game. And I think part of that it'll be very hard for them now not to appoint a full-time coach for the women's game. They say they'll do it if necessary, but I think it'll be very hard for them to justify not having one if they're really serious about it. And I think for that reason, I think the upside of this week is that I think the RFU have to rethink their strategy, and I think they'll come back and they will probably end up investing more in women's rugby than they may have at the start of the week.
Yeah, we'll have to see how it plays out. I mean, that's the most interesting thing for me, is the fact that for so long they're speaking about this World Cup on home soil and how it's an opportunity to develop the women's game here, develop players, garner interest, and then you get to this juncture where just after the World Cup is over, and it was this crucial component in Ireland's bid to host the men's World Cup and whatever, and then it's kind of like, actually, now that the women's World Cup is over, we don't really have a clue what we're doing. We're going to take some time, in fairness, and they're entitled to do that, and try and figure out where we go from here. But all along I thought we were being led to believe that there was a sort of a cogent plan in place for beyond the World Cup, and it turns out it was like, let's get to that and then figure it all out afterwards.
Yeah, I think what Eddie said obviously is important there, because obviously the initial reaction is one of great disappointment and anger and upset, but I think if you do strip it back, and the RFU statement kind of clarified that today, it's a long-term approach. The internal review process is still going on, and that's going to lead then to this strategic plan which they're going to launch next year. So I think having an interim head coach, they're kind of going to end the under-20s model of Nigel Carolan initially, and then now Peter Malone. They held roles with Connacht and Munster respectively while also coaching the under-20s. I know it's slightly different because the women's will have hopefully more games aside from the Six Nations going forward, but as Eddie said, it's a long-term approach. You have to take the silver lining to it. They need to get it right, and if they can take time then to get it right. And having said that, if they get someone in an interim basis now for Six Nations goes well, they sit down again, review that, and say, look, we'd like to offer that person, the job going forward. Then, hopefully, looking back on this week and maybe this World Cup, hopefully that it works. It's worked in their favour.
Yeah, it might turn out to be a watershed moment yet. Staying on the topic of coaches, Eddie, Munster obviously have finally gotten their man, or at least a man. He seems to be very highly regarded in South Africa, certainly speaking to a couple of people down there, and he's a kind of guy, while articulate and intelligent, sort of goes about his business quietly in the background there, very involved with the forwards and I think attacking play for the most part, but I suppose, what do you make of the situation? He's coming in obviously in the middle of a season. I know he's going to be sitting down with Peter O'Mahony this week if they haven't already. For a man of his relative inexperience, certainly in a head coaching position, how important are those leaders going to be, the likes of CJ, the likes of Peter O'Mahony and Conor Murray in that Munster squad?
I think there's a number of dimensions to the whole Munster thing. I think the first thing is it's good news. They've got a coach. The vacuum of Erasmus leaving, and it was a vacuum even though he was there, the players are aware he's halfway out the door, and that wasn't good. So now they've got somebody coming in. That certainly kind of changes the focus. Everything's kind of back on track to an extent. The second thing is the actual transition. That's always going to be problematic, and there's a danger that if it's not a good transition, the season could get wasted, because the reality of the transition is that if Van Grant is his own man, he will come in, he'll want to put his stamp on the team, he'll want to do things his way, and I think players like that. I mean, one thing players look for in a coach is a coach who knows what he wants and gives them a sense of direction and how he wants them to go about their business. And no two coaches are the same, and they don't have to be. You see it in all sports. In the NFL, different coaches do things different ways. There's more maybe they skin the cat. So Van Graan is to come in and put his stamp on the team, and that is a transition. He can probably try and hold the fort until the end of the season and continue what Erasmus is doing, but that's not ideal either, because he's not singing off his hymn sheet. So I think that's just a problem they have to deal with. It's not impossible to deal with, but it's going to be tricky. And if things continue to go on track in terms of results, winning is a great solution to a lot of problems for any team. And if they're getting results, I think it'll be an easy transition. But if things started to go awry, it could become a very messy season, and it could be a write-off season very quickly if things went askew. Now, hopefully it won't. I mean, that if they can keep things going and keep things together, but it will be a challenge. The notion that this will be some seamless process and nothing could possibly go wrong is a bit naive. Hopefully it doesn't, and it might be better the swan on top of the lake, it's gliding along with all the turmoil under the water. But if they can keep it like that, even from the end of the season, it'll be fine. As the guy himself, we don't know a lot about him. Everybody says good things about him, which is good. Mind you, you don't often hear bad things about somebody coming into a new job. That doesn't, usually people give them the benefit of the doubt. I think the big challenge for him, and I don't know the guy at all, obviously, is that step up to head coach. Assistant coaching is a very different world than being a head coach, because if you're assistant coach, you're juggling 3 balls. If you're the head coach, you're juggling 10 balls, and that's where the challenge comes in. Even if he's a very good technician, even if he's a very good communicator, even if he's a very good coach, head coaching is a bit of a misnomer. It's actually, there's a lot more to it than coaching, and it'll be a big change for him, I would presume, coming from a position where he's not a head coach. So they're the kind of 3 areas. I think the definitely positive he's in there. The transition is going to be difficult for everybody. They might be able to keep it on track, and then can he deliver on the job requirements as a head coach, having pretty much zero experience in that environment. And it's a high profile job, and there's not going to be much of a honeymoon here, because there's been a bit of a honeymoon for Munster for the last few years. That honeymoon is running out now.
Yeah, big time. Brian, I suppose one of the things looking at, like, the transition, as Eddie puts it, like Van Graan is going to come in. There's talk that, like, he'll spend a couple of weeks sort of not working under Rassie, but almost shadowing him and just getting used to the whole environment. Then there's separate talk that maybe that might not be the case, because South Africa want Rassie later next month. I'm wondering as well, like, in one sense, it might smooth things over and it might sort of get him up to speed on things, but also, like, does it put him in kind of an awkward enough situation in that you're not able to really implement anything, and you're just listening to the guy from whom you're going to take over. Like, ultimately, when Rassie's gone, things are going to change anyway. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Is the benefit of, like, shadowing the guy that's been there overstayed a little bit?
Yeah, potentially. Like, as Eddie was saying there, like, the transition can go one of two ways, and there's still that bit of uncertainty. We don't know how it's going to pan out. Leaving halfway through a Champions Cup pool campaign is not ideal in the best, like, in any situation. So, but I suppose firstly, like, it is a huge positive now that he's been appointed. We now know who's going to succeed Rassie when he does leave, because over the last 6-7 weeks of this season, every time Rassie's been up for media, anytime any of the players have been up, it's all been about Rassie and when's he leaving. Last couple of weeks since they've made that appointment or that announcement, it's been a focus on rugby, and as Eddie touched on there, like, that's a huge positive, because now all the positives are the focus on rugby. They've been able to kind of narrow that focus, and hopefully, that transition, it's hugely uncertain. We don't know which way it's going to go, but as you kind of said there, like, it's difficult to know which. If Rassie is overstaying his welcome, a lot of fans are kind of saying, well, you kind of overstayed that welcome already.
What have you done for me lately?
Yeah. So it'd be interesting to see how it pans out. As you say, it's a difficult one that they find themselves in. You can see the benefits of both. Rassie staying, kind of easing Johan van Graan into the job, but at the same time, Johan van Graan will want that room to kind of stamp his own authority on things. Yeah,
well, I suppose, Eddie, if Munster are to implode down the line, I suppose it's difficult to say really whether a draw and cast might be considered a good or a bad result. It'll depend on the rest of the pool. What did you make of Munster's performance? There was a lot of good and a lot of bad. It was I don't know. You hear of games of two halves. This was a game of maybe like 8-8. It was kind of crazy.
We've seen Munster teams go away in France before and come away with a losing bonus point and say we'll put that in the bank, and it's been very crucial at the end of the pool. So I think in terms of getting something out of the game, they certainly got something out of the game. They got 2 points, in fact. I think they were extremely lucky to get the 2 points because of the mistakes they made. I think the referee bottled the second yellow card for sure when Zebo slapped down the ball. Like, that was a definite yellow card penalty try scenario, and he bottled it because he just put Conor Murray in the bin a minute earlier. And have Munster to play for 9 minutes with 13 men, it could have been, a fatal blow. But you have to give Munster credit as well for, despite shooting themselves in the foot, they still managed to find a way out of it, And I think they'll take the result, but they won't be happy with the performance. They were a bit of their own enemy a lot of the time. I think they are struggling with their midfield. They haven't sorted out their midfield yet. I'm not sure that Farrell is a solution to 13. And I think that this weekend again, I think he's a very good player, but I think he's like a fish out of water at 13. I think he's a 12. And he struggled against Leinster. He got caught. He bit down for Leinster's second try on a dummy runner. It's a hard place to defend the outside channel. And he threw an intercept pass in cast. He threw a forward pass against Leinster. I think his game is struggling a bit at 13. I think he could be much more effective for him at 12, but Scannell at 13. And they're the kind of things you'd look at and say, And again, there's been a lot of chopping and changing at 10. Is it Keatley? Is it Blendal? Is JJ in the mix? There's a lot of that going on that doesn't help them settle around what they want, the team. And these are the guys that are directing what's going on in the field. They have a good pack of forwards who are playing pretty well. They're not world beaters, but they're playing well as a unit. But they need a guidance behind the scrum and behind the line-out to keep them on the front foot. And I think that's where Munster at the moment are kind of cutting and pasting too much and haven't really got their arms around it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you made there. Like about, I suppose, firstly the struggles in midfield. Then you look at the 10 situation. You seem to have like a number of players for a couple of positions that are all sort of reasonably equal in terms of ability. And like, say, Ian Keatley coming in this weekend, deputising for Tyler Blindell, Hanrahan to the bench. Like, Blindell started the season with such that it's difficult to even say he's going to be a major loss. You look at midfield. You mentioned Chris Farrell, you don't think he's a 13, and then you look at Munster's midfield options. Generally speaking, there are a lot of 12s there. You know, like Taude, yeah, he can play 13. I'd argue that I'd still think he's actually better 12. Rory Scannell probably better 12. Like when they got,
well, I would say Scannell is, for me, is one of the best players Munster have had for the last 2 seasons, and I think they're hiding his talent under a bucket by putting him at 12. I think he can play 13.
Yeah.
I think he's a very, very good footballer. Yeah, I really rate him. I could be wrong. I'm just what I'm looking at. I think at him at 13, it could change their midfield dynamic. And Farrell or Torty at 12, they're 2 very good players. It's just like asking guys to write checks they can't cash is not a good idea, you know. And I think Farrell has struggled at 13 from what I've seen in against Leinster and last week. I just think Scannell is a very, very accomplished footballer, and he's a very talented guy. I'd love to see him get a shot there. And I could be wrong. You know, I'm playing Monday quarterback a bit here, but I just think he ticks the boxes for me, and you'd like to see him there. I think there's no loss, but the bigger problem I think is, and this is we're down the reads here talking about inside centre, out centre, but the bigger problem of that is that there is no stability around that back line in terms of selection. It's changing every week. So if you're a forward, there's a different guy who's driving the bus every week, you know, in terms of getting you over the gain line. And I don't think that's good in terms of building their game and building their confidence, building what they want. They should be building these kind of performances as the season goes to get better and better if they want to be, you know, at the top table at the end of the season, you know, come to playoffs and stuff. And that kind of chopping and changing all the time, I don't think does serves them well in terms of trying to progress their what they're doing as a team. No matter what way they want to go, you need some element of stability. And I think that's probably what's missing in their backline at the moment, just holding them back a little bit.
Yeah, I'm like, much of the talk about Racing coming to Thomond Park this weekend, we've heard terms like different animal. Dan Carter is back at 10, as Ryan was telling me just before we came on. There's also an orange weather warning in Limerick for that game, so like it's possibly not going to be that type of game where you're flinging the ball out the backs. How do you reckon Munster are going to get on? Like, is this going to be a case of almost reverting to, maybe not type, but reverting to the style of play they brought to some of these big games last year, where it was kind of forward orientated and also not the most expansive style, more abrasive, and I guess a traditional South African style, if you want to put it that way?
Yeah, I think actually the weather forecast is the best news they could have had all week, and I'm not taking away anything from it, but I think it will focus the mind for them, and they will have to play a game that's very forward oriented if it's going to blow wind and rain as we expect. The pressure though for that is going to be on Murray and Keatley. Now, I've no worries about Murray. I think he's still, for me, one of the best scrum halves in the world, and taught his game. But I think Keatley really, he's capable of playing a really good game and managing it. But again, his consistency in doing that has struggled. So if Keatley hits the straps tomorrow with Murray and the weather's bad, I think Munster will beat Racing. I think they won't be at all put out by the conditions, and that's not taken away from the fact that if the weather was good, they wouldn't beat them either. But I think it'd be if the weather was good and Racing are throwing the ball around and Munster are trying to throw the ball around as well, I don't think they're set up at the moment to play like that. So I think the conditions kind of suit them tomorrow. No disrespect to the fact, I think they'll manage those conditions better. I think their pack will rise to it. It's a home game. It'll be a raucous crowd. And French teams, like, by and large, don't like playing from home. And if the weather is bad, it's another bummer for them, you know. So I think there's a lot in terms of going Munster's way tomorrow, I think. So I expect them to win the game. I don't think it'll be a classic in terms of rugby, but it could be a classic in terms of game management, and it could be a classic for the fans. And I think they won't win by much if they do, but I think Munster will get it done tomorrow, the way things are set up for them. Could be eating my words tomorrow night, but I'm actually quite optimistic for Munster tomorrow in the circumstances as they arise.
Yeah, we'll see how it plays out for Munster. Ryan, Johnny Sexton back for Leinster, and a couple of changes in their side as well.
Yeah, like obviously Ross Byrne debutised last week against Montpellier incredibly well. Like he came up with a couple of big plays. Not the only one, obviously, who stood up for Leinster last week and kind of showed what he can do on the biggest stage. But any team with Johnny Sexton in it is automatically a better team. That's a huge boost for Leinster automatically. They haven't got a great record over in Glasgow. I think the last time they won over there was 2012. Again, the weather's meant to be quite poor for Glasgow tomorrow. So Dave Rennie, the Glasgow coach, has kind of said, I think he used the word arm wrestle. He's expecting an arm wrestle. So, that's an interesting one. I think they were very impressive last week, Leinster, against Montpellier. Obviously, they're quite a young side, missing a lot of leaders in that group, but they came through, stood up. Huge physical test for them, and came away with the bonus points. It was a really encouraging start. This week is another test. The big games are coming thick and fast for them. But it'd be interesting to see how they go. Sexton's obviously a huge boost, but I think Nasewa just as much in midfield. Eddie was talking about the instability, I suppose, in Munster's midfield and backline. Leinster don't have the same extent of problems, but with Nasewa out and Noel Reid coming in to partner Henshaw in there, it makes that midfield channel very vulnerable for them. I think they had a few problems last week when Nasewa did go off injured. I think Noel Reid missed 6 tackles when he came on, and straight away I think Fran Stein got the ball, and they just ran straight through them. So that will be an area of concern, and I presume Glasgow, Dave Rennie, I was just speaking to him actually on the phone before we came on air. He didn't really want to elaborate too much on where they'll target Leinster. He did mention Sexton. They'll look to disrupt, when he gets on the ball naturally, as all teams do now. But I presume that midfield channel is going to be an area where they will target again. Yeah,
Eddie, if the wet weather is to suit Munster, is an argument to be made that Leinster in Glasgow against a team like Glasgow might be slightly inhibited by bad conditions?
I think they're very similar teams in how they play, so I don't think it helps either of them if the weather is bad. But I think the bigger picture there is that, and this doesn't bode well for Leinster, is that Glasgow have to win this game or they're out of the Champions Cup, having lost last week to Exeter. And they played very well. I mean, they had Exeter by the throat early in the game, but Exeter dug it out as they do. But if they lose at home tomorrow, it's curtains. So it's a must-win game for Glasgow. And I think Glasgow are back on track again this year. I think they had a lull year after they won, but I think now Rennie has really tightened things up again there. The thing worries me a little about Leinster is that they've won games this year that you never saw them losing because there was so much control, but they never won them by much. I actually thought I couldn't see them losing last Saturday for the first hour. I just thought they were head and shoulders above Montpellier. Montpellier just brought Neanderthal rugby to Dublin. They just had one-off runners, huge guys running at Leinster. Leinster were up for it. They missed some tackles for sure, but Montpellier didn't deliver anything other than physicality. I thought Leinster were miles ahead of them in terms of tactics and awareness, scored some great tries. But then when you expect Leinster to kick on and really, wrap the game up, they kind of go into their shell a bit and bring the opposition onto them. It's the same against Munster. I think they never looked like losing to Munster at the Aviva Stadium. But at the end of the day, it was a one-score game. And you're going, how did that happen? And you'd like to see Leinster, when they get into those situations now, when they're at their foot in someone's throat, that they really kick on. And that's probably the biggest challenge for them. Now, if it's a tight game tomorrow, and they don't kick on, they could lose the game, and that's the worrying thing for me. You feel they're 90% to a huge performance, but they're not there yet, and they'll probably need 100% performance tomorrow in Glasgow to win. If they do win in Glasgow tomorrow, I think it'll be a fantastic victory. I think it will be a really, really good victory for them because Glasgow are going to leave nothing in the tank tomorrow. They can't afford to, and that sets the agenda for tomorrow.
Yeah, I think it's also, sorry Gav, it's probably worth pointing out as well that Stuart Hogg is straight back in for Glasgow, first appearance since the Lions tour, and he's straight back in. Like Dave Rennie not taking any chances there, and as Eddie said, must win for them. Full house, and that ground is a real fortress for them. Like it's quite a tight, small ground.
It's a hard ground,
yeah. Well, I didn't want to say that, to be honest, because I'm going over tomorrow, so I don't want to disrupt the locals or whatever.
I won't be there, and I hate it.
No, but you can imagine they'll come out of the blocks fairly quickly against Leinster, and they come out all guns blazing because, as you said, must win after their defeat last weekend.
Yeah, but is that an inability to put teams away, Eddie, and put the foot on the throat down to a kind of a collective inexperience, or a team that, even though they are motoring along reasonably nicely, are still kind of in transition, like they're still trying to figure themselves out?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a fair comment. It could be part of that. But you got to ask yourself, if you get to a point where you have a team on their knees, why not just continue what you're doing and finish them off? Because what got you to that point in the game where they had him by the throat, like it's like in a boxing match, you the guy's on the ropes and you don't finish him, you back off and he comes back into the fight. Like, the stupid thing about last week is I thought Leinster were way better than Montpellier, and then it turned out that, again, a bit like the Zebo, the yellow card for Adam Byrne, that could have been a penalty try, and it was a tied game. And then even at the very end, the Dola had one of the dumbest plays of the year. He was put away around the corner, and the clock runs out, and he puts a grubber kick in, and Leinster kick it out. Like Leinster should never have been in that position last week because they played so well. Like, I'm not kicking them. I'm just saying they played so well for the first hour against a good team, a big physical team. But they had done so well. You got to think, how could they find themselves like at the end, kind of hanging on? And it was a bit like Munster. They played so well against Munster that they kind of, the Munster game was another game where they kind of fell across the line by 6 points. I thought they were more than 6 points better than Munster on the day. Like, Munster were kicking themselves after they played so badly in some ways, and their discipline let them down. So I think if Leinster can put that 80-minute performance in tomorrow, they can win in Glasgow. But it will take that 80-minute performance from them, and a very good performance. But it's in them. It's about maybe tomorrow they hit the straps for the 80 minutes and they get it done. But I think I wouldn't put the house on them tomorrow up in Glasgow, because, as I say, Glasgow are a very good team. It's a very hard place to go, and Glasgow have to win. That to me that sets the whole agenda.
Yeah, there's a question here actually on this game from Stephen Elliott on Facebook. He's asking about Leinster's back three selection. He says, have Leinster chosen a weaker attacker in McFadden for Byrne, and is that not playing not to lose rather than to win?
Well, I think Byrne is a good player, but he's quite inexperienced, and I thought you saw that last week a bit. So I think McFadden brings a lot of, smarts and stability into the back three. You're also missing out on Massey, who's a leader as well on the field. McFadden would be that calibre guy. Like, he's a very smart player. He's very stable influence, and he's very experienced in the back three. So, like, when you think about it, you've Carberry, who's quite inexperienced back there, and you've Barry Daly, who's not that experienced. So putting McFadden into the back three kind of steadies the ship there. So I think that's a smart enough selection, because I think Byrne is a very good player, but he's probably a little bit inexperienced, away from home in a big game, going to be tight. I mean, he blocked that ball down last week with his hand. I think that was it. It was arguably a penalty try.
Yeah.
And we got to dodge the bullet there. Like, you wouldn't be doing that every week and expecting to get away with a penalty and a yellow card.
No, it was.
So I think McFadden going in there just steady the ship a bit, and that's probably not a bad thing, because you've got Henshaw and Noel Reid in the middle of the field. That's not a hugely experienced combination either. So yeah, I think they're still trying to find a balance where they're being able to attack, but also keep the kind of stability and experience on the field. So I think those selections make sense from that perspective.
Yeah, before we touch on Ulster, and we'll finish on Ulster as well, Eddie, Kate McCarthy has gotten in touch with a couple of wry eyebrow raised emojis on Twitter. She's asking, the Irish women's team are looking for a part-time casual coach. How are you fixed, Eddie?
Well, as you know, it's unlikely Abigail will be employed by the RFU, put it that way.
We'll say no more. The Ulster team is in, Eddie. You said there's a couple of surprising selections. It actually, I think, came out just as we were coming over here, so I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. It's now they're going down to the south of France, which is, it's a big one, and they had a great result last week, you have to say, against Wasps, but Wasps are going through a bad patch. And the game was on a knife edge, really, and they changed them. They got 2 tries in 2 minutes. And the guys who've been really, Piato's been playing well, but I think the 2 unsung heroes have been McCluskey and Stockdale, who've been outstanding for Ulster this year. Like, I was at the Scarlets game in Ravenhill, and the Scarlets kind of almost did a smash and grab job in Ulster twice. And Ulster teams have struggled when that's happened to them, but again, McCluskey came to the rescue, got his hands free out of 2 tackles. They got 2 tries, and Stockdale was a big part of that. Again, last week, Stockdale got a try, McCluskey got a try. Stockdale scored 5 tries and 5 starts this season. McCluskey scored 3 tries and 6 starts. So they've been really the guys with Piato, and suddenly you find that Stockdale's dropped. They're going for a more experienced back 3 with Andrew Trimble and Tommy Bowe. And I just think this guy's on fire at the moment. And if you're going on to the south of France and you want an X factor that might get you across the line, And the other one then is they've put Paul Marshall at 9 and they've dropped John Cooney. And Cooney's been their find of the season almost in terms of place kicking. He's been very good. He missed a couple of conversions last week, but I've again watched him. He's really running the game very well. And Marshall's been around Ulster for a long time. Paul Marshall. He's one of these players who comes off the bench and lights things up, but he's never really played well for Munster as a starter. He doesn't seem to be able to control the game, and I think Cooney has been doing that brilliantly. So they're the kind of two selections that I would scratch my head and say I'd certainly want Cooney on the field to manage the game. And Stockdale has been lighting it up. Why leave him on the bench going to South of France? Where this guy, he's a monster. He's 6'5". Like, he's a huge young fella, and he's fast, and he's got energy at the moment. He's got confidence, and as a winger, confidence is basically your currency. So this guy could change a game, and I just scratch my head as to how he's riding the pine on Sunday.
Yeah, it does strike as a curious situation and a couple of curious decisions. Like, it sounds like a bit of a bottle job, to be honest. Like, it's like you're going for a kind of stability experience because it's the south of France, and yet there's a couple of guys there, particularly Stockdale. We've seen during the week, the sort of discourse about Stockdale was that he's the prototype Ireland winger, or Joe Schmidt winger more so.
Well, sorry for jumping in there, but if you picked the two best wings for Ireland at the moment, if Ireland had to take the field tomorrow, the two best wings in the country are Keith Earls and Jacob Stockdale. The other two guys at the moment, they're lighting it up every time they get the ball. So for Ulster to go and leave them off going down to South of France, I mean, it seems like they're playing for a draw or something. I don't know.
Yeah, chasing an away goal, I think. Do you reckon they can still get it done with the way they've lined up? Obviously, like, there is the chance for players to come on and make impact off the bench, but how do you reckon Ulster are going to get on before we wrap?
I'd be worried because La Rochelle went to London last week and did a serious number on Harlequins. They look really good team. They're playing with huge confidence, and at home they're going to bring it up another notch. I wouldn't be over optimistic. I mean, you never know, is all I'll say. But in this case, I wouldn't be totally optimistic. I thought maybe someone like Stockdale could be a spark that could change things for them. But I think La Rochelle look a serious outfit, and the fact they won away from home last week, they're certainly not going to consider losing at home. Now, if Ulster could pull this off, it'd be a great result, but I'm not overly optimistic about it.
Do Ulster need one of these results, lads, where it seems like, I mean, certainly the chatter up there is that, like, they're for the past, say, 3-4 years they've been kind of inconsistent. You get this magnificent result somewhere, and then you take 5 steps backwards by going to Italy and losing in the league or something like that. Like, Stephen Ferris was talking to me about this recently, and he was saying that all they're looking for is a string of consistent results, and he thinks they can take off. Now, as it transpires, like, after a very impressive win against Wasps, it's incredibly difficult to go down to La Rochelle and get that victory. But they just need a kind of a trademark victory, or like a watershed victory, to propel them onto that next level, maybe alongside Leinster and Munster, if you were to put it in an Irish context.
Well, I think, save for that defeat in Treviso, it's been a very progressive start to the season for Ulster. Like, they've really made strides week on week. John O'Gibbs obviously coming in, Les Kiss, bit of a backroom shuffle, and as Eddie said, John Cooney's been one of the finds of the season. Like, I've seen Ulster live a couple of times this season, and he's been good. Place kicking, he's been excellent, and as Eddie said, Jacob Stockdale, he used the word X Factor. He's exactly that. Every time he gets in the ball, the crowd are on the edge of their seats. Last week the game, on an absolute knife edge, had been an arm wrestle, both packs going at each other for best part of an hour last week, and Stockdale and Piatow combined, and that was the game won for Ulster. And as Eddie said, it's been really encouraging that when games have been close, he mentioned the Scarlets as well, when games have been close, they've been able to kind of see it out and ride out that kind of period of instability for them and get the win. So they've been good at home, less convincing away from home, and obviously that Treviso, and they struggled actually against Ebra as well in Italy. They just about ground out the results in the Pro 14, then lost obviously to Treviso. So less convincing at home, and maybe that's Les Kiss. You like to think that he's going for, as Eddie said, a bit of experience in the back line tomorrow. For Sunday, but hard to see them come away from France with a result.
Yeah. So Eddie, to wrap up, Munster, Glasgow, La Rochelle. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think so. Yeah, unfortunately for Munster, but unfortunately, I think it might be. I'm not ruling out Leinster. I think Leinster could get it done, but it'll take a big performance. I'm not saying it's not in them. That's the one I'm not sure about. I'm not optimistic about Ulster and La Rochelle, but I am optimistic about Munster. I'm on the bubble over Leinster. I think they could do it, but they'll need a big performance.
Fair enough.
For 80 minutes.
Yeah. Absolutely. We'll see how it plays out over the weekend. Eddie, thanks a million for joining us. Pleasure as always. We'll speak to you soon.
Cheers, guys. All the best.
Thanks a million.
Thanks, Gav.
And thank you to Air Sport, and for you at home for watching as well. Enjoy the rugby over the weekend. We will be back next Friday, and we'll see you then. Cheers.